welcome to our podcast today, which we're doing on unlocking radical change in the heritage, arts and culture sector, doing a sort of East versus or meets West comparison. We've got Alex Manning-Jones here from Culture Derby as director. We've got Sarah Blair Manning, as well as Chief Executive of Birmingham Botanical Gardens. Co-hosting with me, we've got Harry Spider, CEO and founder of Ford Institute, and of course myself, Lauren Thompson, founder of Roots and Futures.
I'm Alex Manning-Jones. I'm the director for Culture Derby. Culture Derby is Derby's cultural compact. So I see myself as a cultural connector, fueling the city and growing the creative spirit of our city with our creatives and our cultural sector. My job is to bring people together. So whether that's through education, health, businesses, creatives, freelancers, young people, cultural leaders, you name it. My job is to bring those people together and really to advocate and champion culture and the value of culture, and ensuring that culture has a voice around the table, but it also has an opportunity to grow and to thrive in terms of its sustainability as we look at regeneration of Derby City and the development of what the city and the region is going to look like over the next 5 to 10 years. So the job's quite big. I'm quite new in the role as well. I say new, I've only been there a year, and the organisation itself is very much in its infancy, but it has support from the Arts Council and Derby City Council and all of the cultural leaders and organisations across the city. So a lot of that is about supporting and developing and building those foundations, because that's incredibly important, especially when you're trying to develop a new organisation, as you all know. So I'm also advocating not only in the local space, but in regional and national spaces for culture and the voices of Derby. So I've been recently appointed to be on the board for the UK Council for Creative UK. Alongside,
Great, well done, you.
Thank you, alongside lots of other very well established leaders from the creative and cultural industries across the UK. So I've got that appointment for the next 2 years, and I'll be specifically looking at the creative industry sector plan and supporting and guiding Creative UK on some of their policy decisions and helping them guide them in the challenges, the ideas and the needs of our cultural community, specifically focusing on sustainability and finance within the cultural sector. So hopefully I'll be a voice in and advocating for Derby and the East Midlands as part of that role. So yeah, that's kind of what I do in a bit of a nutshell.
So I'm Sarah Blair Manning, and I'm currently the Chief Executive of Birmingham Botanical Gardens and the first female Chief Executive since it opened almost 200 years ago.
Blimey,
Yes.
only taken 200 years.
Wow. And I come from a Gypsy Roma traveller background, so as my dad said, not bad from the girl from the fairground. I lead the Botanical Gardens, and we are a civic institution for the city of Birmingham. We welcome 250,000 people, well, actually over 250,000 people actually per year now to the gardens. And we have the job of sharing the power of plants with people, the places that we live, and with the planet, and what that means. And we set all of our work within that context. I'm also a passionate advocate of heritage arts and culture, and I've worked in the cultural sector for over 37 years now. And I sit on the West Midlands Growth Company's Tourism and Hospitality Advisory Board, the Greater Birmingham Chamber of Commerce Council, and for Botanic Gardens Education Network as a trustee as well. The other thing that the gardens are aiming to do through the work that we're doing operationally, but also connected with our almost £20 million restoration project at the gardens, is to change the perceptions of Birmingham and what Birmingham is and what Birmingham does and the people of Birmingham. So we're hoping that that's going to be successful too.
culture, we're here to talk about culture and art and its role in place-based renewal. Culture itself is a very elastic term. So I'd be interested, now we've got two people who know a lot about culture and heritage and arts, to what does culture mean to you in the context of place-based renewal? So Sarah, perhaps you can.
I think culture is all income. It's everything, isn't it? I mean, it's everything from food to playing dominoes in the pub to going to opera to dance to football, actually. I mean, culture has many different forms, and it's about thinking how you can utilise that movement, really, to support the things that are important to people and the planet.
So, Alex, what do you, in terms of Derby, obviously you...
I think for us in Derby, and I suppose culture just in general, it's about storytelling.
Yeah.
It's about communities. It's about bringing people together. It's about sharing stories, understanding one another in a different way, expressing each other, whether that's through food or music or art or sport, for example. They are the opportunities where communities and stories and people come together. And I think that's the power of what culture brings.
And I think there's an intersection there, isn't there, in terms of, and thinking about gardens, which is where I'm based at the moment, and just trying to find globally recognised points of connection and language. And that's what I'm finding really interesting about Botanic Gardens, and actually that global connection of all people around plants. Fascinating.
Yeah, I think that's really, because you've mentioned the word global there. And actually, I sort of feel like we've got to this point where we're talking about hyper-local and grassroots and place-based sort of interventions and so forth. So how does the global play into your sort of thinking there?
So I think it plays in at that level as well. So thinking about super diversity, as Harris has spoken about, and that's as far as we're concerned at the Gardens, it's a superpower, that diversity at Birmingham. And newly arrived communities, individuals, established communities, hyperlocal, regional, national, there is a point of connection in terms of thinking about a global connection of plants and language around that. So we're having really interesting scenarios at the Gardens at the moment where Syrian new arrivals to the city will be coming to the Gardens. We collapse the pay barrier for those individuals and communities that can't afford to come. And they are quite obviously grieving for gardens, homes that they've left behind. But there's a point of connection there in terms of we have this particular item in our collection, and it will be different for museums and different art spaces in terms of collections. But we have this particular plant that reminds them of home or evokes a story or a family memory. And that's really, really powerful in terms of trying to create a new home, a sense of connection with where you've come from, but also trying to plot a way forward into the future.
I think so, and I think that's really interesting that Alex mentioned storytelling. Yeah. And I think for me, arts and heritage music in that very elastic way, it connects at a global level, but also at a local level. So I'll give you like a story. So driving here on the M42 from Birmingham to Nottingham, my daughter, we were watching a film over the weekend. It's actually a film called Saipan. It's a dispute between Roy Keane and Mick McCarthy at the 2002 World Cup when Roy Keane left, right? So it was a very interesting film. But at the end, they played a song by Fountains DC called Favourite. And I said to my daughter, because I know Fountains DC, they listened to them, but never came across this song. And I said to my daughter, Jess, who sings that? And she said, it's Fountains DC. Who she sing? So ever since, on repeat, I've been playing that song because it had a connection to me, the lyrics, the melody. And so they're a band from Dublin, but what they sung about connects at a visceral level to me in Birmingham and makes me full of joy, full of happiness, full of reflection. And I think, going back to what Alex's point saying, and Sarah, that connectivity that arts and heritage brings. You talk about the Syrian communities that are emerging, love that phrase that you use in terms of that grieving or wanting that space. And Alex, you were talking about storytelling. Art culture has got the capacity to reach places and people in no other medium that I know. When we're talking about football or arts, music, film, it just evokes this visceral reaction and it brings people together.
And at different points in people's lives
Absolutely.
as well, and individually and also collectively.
Yeah.
And to support and power movements, actually.
Yeah. So the storytelling piece, I think that in Derby, because Derby's a place, both of you, Lauren's
Derby born and bred. There we are, from Barbados, both here, yeah.
But Derby's got a rich history.
Yeah.
Across like culture, across football, across all of those things. I mean,
and I think for Derby, that is so incredibly important. Identity, belonging, storytelling that is able to be shared across generations. And I've been working with a couple of creatives and artists over the past couple of months around folklore and about myths and about sharing stories intergenerationally. And actually what that looks like in different communities. So we've been working with the traveller community, we've been working with the Black community and within Carnival, and how these stories are shared and understood. And I think going back to what Sarah was saying about language and how important language is. But, again, those stories they're so resonant when it comes to either moments in time that take you back to a place, and you think about, patients that have dementia, for example, reminiscence theatre, or the fact that your brain only holds that music as well. That is the point in terms of those lyrics. If you play a song to a dementia patient, they will still be able to remember that music, those lyrics, because it's a different part of your brain that absorbs that. Yeah. That is the superpower. That's what we're talking about. That's where that opportunity of identity and true belonging and being grounded really comes from.
Do you think, both of you, that sense of different communities, I mean, I've just reflected on both of you said, that storytelling. So if you sort of connect politics over as we have now, the rise of reform, the rise of nationalist parties across Europe and across the world, what we call white working class communities, whether they're in the East Midlands or in the West Midlands, there's a sense that storytelling around pride, about who you are, has been eroded by neighbourhood change, of cities changing. Do either of you, I don't know if Sarah, you and I have spoken about both of our backgrounds, so do you get that sense that there's one community that is almost missing out on that storytelling? And do you think that that's a challenge for both of you as leaders within arts and cultural heritage sector? Is that something that we should do something about? Is this like the forgotten communities in our country?
It's a big question. I think voices aren't always completely balanced in every situation that you're in, whether that's in the political space, in terms of decision making, in terms of our citizens having that power and being a part of those decision making opportunities. Voices are silenced. Communities in which, for example, in Derby, we have the biggest deaf community outside of London. It's huge, yet their voices still aren't really truly heard. I do think that is a community that isn't even able to have a physical voice. So actually, are we doing enough for that community, for example? And, you look at, children and young people. I remember pandemic, COVID, and I remember being working as a producer actually at the time in Derby and going, where's the voice of our young people, our children that are having to deal with this situation and they have no idea. I mean, none of us knew what was going on, but they literally had no idea. It was stripped away from them. Where is their voice in all of this? And remember really trying hard to create a project or a program called Reimagine. So if you could reimagine 2020, what would have 2020 have been for you? It would have been my prom. It would have been my GCSE results. It would have been me starting university. It would have been me graduating. It would have been me starting school. Those are the opportunities where we go, where are those voices aren't currently heard, and how can we amplify those voices? And I think that happens on a daily basis, but it's really about unpicking that and really trying to find not only an opportunity where a community's voice is felt unheard, but of finding a way for those voices to have a platform to be heard that actually makes something happen within that space. I think quite a lot of time we hear voices as a kind of a tick box exercise and this kind of consultation. Actually, youth voice, for example. Youth voice absolutely, should be a part of everything that we do, but ultimately they want to hear the youth voice from the school counsellors. They're not wanting to hear the voices of the unheard young people because they daren't listen to them because they don't know what they want to hear.
So, Sarah, where do white working class communities fit into the super diversity, superpower that you spoke about earlier?
So I think that those stories are underrepresented at the moment. And I think that is a problem for those communities, but I think it's a problem for wider communities in terms of balance. And undoubtedly stories are there. So it's about those communities grabbing hold of that storytelling technique and being supported by wider communities and also structures within community to be able to tell those stories. I agree with you. It's underrepresented. It's the challenges around that they are revealing themselves through flags. They're revealing themselves through different mechanisms, which I believe is unhelpful. And I think that bringing those voices to the table to have a cohesive and all-encompassing conversation of all communities has surely got to be a more positive way of pushing it forward.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point there, and there's a couple of things sort of going through my mind as I'm sort of listening to everyone sort of speak here. There's certainly an element around timing, and actually when do you bring that voice in at the right point in time? And my lived experience, and again, really focusing on sort of like the elderly and eldership, and you talked about dementia. My granddad is in his early 90s now. He came over during the World War. Polish, Ukrainian, heavily persecuted. And actually now's got to a point in his life where he can't remember any of that, but also he can't capture the history and the storytelling behind it. And people really want to hear it because actually in Derby, Nottingham, actually the Polish, Ukrainian communities are quite a big one. And then the other is, and I refer back to sort of what I was doing at the weekend, and I was working with Our House and Resolve Nottingham, sort of mobilising around the Charterist movement and bringing people together and starting to think about how do you bring in those unheard voices. But it's incredibly difficult because I don't know whether it's apathy. Is it apathy, or is this why we need culture and art and heritage and music to get people to the table?
I would challenge us actually on that because, and we don't want to labour the point, but if you think about the white working class communities, how they were portrayed. So in British realism in the 1950s, they were portrayed as fairly heroic characters. So The Loneliness of a Long Distance Runner, all of those classic films, it's working class communities in the 1950s and 60s, largely white, who were seen as being really important and validated through film. And then if you go through culture, through like music in the 1960s and 70s, that working class musicians like punk came out of, like, no one would say that the Sex Pistols and Johnny Rotten, and Steve Jones, the guitarist who had a handkerchief on his head, no one would say that Steve Jones is a middle class person. He was like a one-man crime wave in West London on it. So those depictions about white men, young white men, as being heroic, sexy, interesting, validated, how over the course of like 30, 40 years, how is that being reduced to the caricature of white men as being this lumpen proletariat, violent, who hoist flags and dislike people seeking asylum in hotels? And is that something that you two, as like activists and leaders within culture, that rebalance? Does there need to be a rebalance of it? And because does that then connect to wider politics and public policy and what cities like Birmingham and Derby are about?
I think it does, and I think it starts off within your own organisations and your own circles, doesn't it? So thinking about the structures and the staff team that we have at the Gardens and trying to represent the diversity of the city, that absolutely includes white working class men. And the majority of the people working at the Gardens at the moment, and a botanical garden is effectively a museum without walls. So we work in what one could suggest is a rarefied sort of attraction, although a lot of people think it's no different from a park, and I absolutely understand why to take that. We can go into that maybe a little bit later. But what's really powerful, I think, about the staff team as it's emerging and developing at the Gardens is that we are all pretty much working class, of all sorts of diversities, backgrounds, heritage. And the white working class piece is as important as my background, which is, Gypsy Roma traveller, and is equal. So I think it's about doing that. And whenever we meet with anybody or any partner coming into the Gardens, we will absolutely lay out what our background is and who we are and who we're working for and who we're representing. And that includes every community in Birmingham.
Again, I think for all of us, but for Alex and Sarah, Lauren and I have spoken about this, is that, do you think the fundamental problem for arts and culture in terms of renewal, in terms of politicians and policymakers, is that there's a sense, there's a stereotype that arts and culture are just for posh white people, and all the stuff that you're a great reforming leader of botanical gardens. I'm not saying that because you're my mate. I really believe that, and in terms of what you've done, there is fantastic leadership. Do you think that's a fundamental problem in terms of it's arts and culture has been reduced to this thing that only like posh white people can get access to?
Big question. I think there's...
Always ask big questions.
Yeah. Big question. Because there's so many different layers within that. I know. And I think one of them actually is around the word arts and culture. Very much so we just go culture. Mm-hmm. Culture and heritage. Mm-hmm. Culture. We don't even say the word arts. Reason being, it's that language is kind of reduced within our conversations around it's the arts because of exactly that reason, because of the elitist that word and that connotation has, and it kills me. But I can understand because when I was younger, it was the arts, and we were really proud of that. It's then gone, oh no, it's culture. So it feels then more kind of inclusive, which is absolutely what it needs to be, and so it should be. But actually then what that takes away from it is then having these discussions about, well, how are we defining culture in this conversation? Mm-hmm. Well, actually we're defining it like X, Y, and Z because the arts has been kind of taken out. And I think from my background, I came from a working class background, from a single mum who had MS. So I was a young carer, went to university on a maintenance grant. Yeah. All of those things, and battled through university. Didn't get to stay away from home, worked full time at the same time as having a degree, came from a low socioeconomic background. You know, as a young white working class woman, and a young person that came from Burton, which is very near to Derby, but again, somewhere that didn't have any of those opportunities, didn't have any access to the arts, didn't have all of this at the end of your fingertips, and had to work hard, very, very hard, to be able to have a voice, to be able to access the opportunities that I was able to access. And, you know, the reason why I got my first job at the Royal Shakespeare Company back in 2011 was because it was a paid internship. Because I'd had that maintenance grant all the way through my studies, the Durwood Charitable Foundation were looking for the first cohort, and the RSC saw something in me. I don't know what it was. I cried in that interview because they said to me, what would it mean to you to work in a place like this? And I literally broke down and went, things like this don't happen to people like me. So
that's so interesting, because that is what we say all the time at the Gardens in terms of this. Everybody working here practically could tell a version of that story. And I'm sorry for interrupting, but I think to a certain degree, I agree with you in terms of there is this shorthand in terms of, you know, it's white middle class. We get that all the time at the Gardens because we're in leafy Edgbaston. 5 minutes over the road is Ladywood, one of the, you know, multi-deprived communities in Birmingham. So it's a misrepresentation as well. And it's a misrepresentation, actually, of what the culture looks like at the Gardens, because it's not white middle class. It's just not university. You know, I mean, it's super diverse, actually. Yeah. And there's something around, many leaders across the country who are absolutely wedded, as you are undoubtedly, to making sure that representation and programming is absolutely reflecting the local communities and being delivered by the local communities as well. So I think that there's a little bit of a habit in terms of, you know, if we were going to go Arts Council speak, you know, we're all battling against the white middle class, you know, sort of cohorts, and we must do something about it. So there's something around actually telling it how it is and being proud of that, but not stopping, because obviously we're not quite there yet either. So I think it's somewhere in the middle. I would say somewhere in the middle.
Look, I mean, I've been the Birmingham Botanical Gardens. I've been taking my kids there since they were little, you know, and they're not little anymore. And it's an amazing space. And you're right, it's like incredibly diverse. If you go to your film nights there, which I've been to before you arrived at the Botanical Gardens, it was fantastic. There's all sorts of different people just enjoying consuming art on the screen and having a reflection and talking about it afterwards, which is, I think, it's a very powerful tool. But going on, I think there's so many ways into this in terms of that your two organisations, the broader themes around arts and culture. There is a view that there's another green space close to you, which is Cannon Hill Park, which is a beloved park in Birmingham. And that is incredibly diverse because it's next to Borsall Heath, where I grew up, very, very ethnically diverse. And then you've got Kingsheath Park, where I live now, and others, which so largely sort of a middle-class neighbourhood. But Borsall Heath is where it comes. And you go to Cannon Hill Park, and there's all sorts of different people there, you know, enjoying themselves, going into the Midlands Arts Centre, and it's great. My point is that parks like that play a pivotal role in terms of the body of a city. Central Park in New York City. Yeah, and all of these spaces, they're all free.
Yep.
So I suppose my challenge to you, my good
why
mate,
aren't we free?
Why aren't you free? Thank you. Why aren't you free?
They're trying to make museums that are free paid.
And that's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes, that conversation that's happening in London following the Hodge review. So that is interesting. So
why aren't you free?
I absolutely agree with you. All of that. So there's over 600 parks in Birmingham, green spaces, reservoirs that are free. So the difference between a park and a botanic garden is that we're a curated collection which is labelled, it's interpreted, it's researched, it's looked after. So I go back to think about Botanic Gardens as a museum, but a museum of plants. And we share the relevance of plants with people, the places that we live, and the planet. Mm-hmm. And we do act as a free offer to our most challenged communities and individuals. And that's something that we brought in over the past 4 years. The gardens didn't used to do that. So we actively lower the pay barrier for people to come in for free. But we're a registered charity.
Yes.
And the business model has been, since it started in 1832, of a membership and some sort of paid admission. We are one of the cheapest attractions in Birmingham still. And we feel that until there is a significant shift, and I would advocate for a shift in terms of supporting arts, heritage and culture and making everything free to access, and the government stepping in and actually recognising what arts, heritage and culture does for placemaking and for people's lives and health and well-being and all of that good stuff that we all know about. Until that happens and we have a slightly different model like the French and the Italian model, then we need to make a way and we need to find a way of maintaining the ability to look after the gardens and protect the gardens for the future. And the only way to do that, frankly, because we don't receive any sort of grant funding on a regular basis at all, because we have a different accrediting body to Arts Council England, so we're not applicable for any other stuff that happens in the UK other than project funding. We need to have an entry charge, but we're absolutely committed and will stay committed to this as long as I'm in post, to reducing the pay barrier and allowing people in free, as and when we can.
Great answer. I suppose for Alex in Derby is why shouldn't we expect people who work in the arts and cultural sectors to be entrepreneurial, to generate money, to do this? Why should the public sort of fund you? Because in the States, it's a completely different model. Yeah. Where people like leaders in arts and culture are expected to be entrepreneurial. So it's like flipping the question I just asked to Sarah, to you, saying, well, why should I pay out of my taxes to support your organisation?
I think it's a bit of a double-edged sword, because I absolutely agree that I can't even remember the percentage, I think it's like 62% reduction of local authority funding into arts, culture and heritage over the past 10 years. The reduction is ridiculous, and that has put our organisations and our absolute assets, actually, and our anchor institutions in a really, really fragile position. We've lost institutions and organisations, so we've lost access. We've lost opportunity for the next generation. So when it comes to things like that, absolutely, you could not think of a city without a theatre, without a museum, without a library, but we don't think about that in terms of the infrastructure of our cities moving forward, because we just go, they're just there. And actually, I think there's something in, councils really ensuring that these are becoming part of the infrastructure and they're part of those plans and that redevelopment and that regeneration going forward. Because ultimately, just because they're there doesn't mean that they're always going to be there.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's really, really difficult. Yeah. And I think but then on the flip side of that, I do agree that we have to look at things slightly differently. We're in a very different space now. We've got to look, entrepreneurial in terms of sustainability and legacy, because we're in a different space. Actually, these are investment opportunities now. So actually there needs to be a balance, I think, in both, funding-wise in terms of grants, as well as entrepreneurial business cases, business plans and inward investment. And it needs to be a balance, and we need to support the cultural and creative community to understand what those opportunities can be and create a shared language between private sector, public sector and the cultural sector to really support that legacy. Anyway, sorry.
No, so building on that, because you talked about investment and philanthropy and so forth, what does the East Midlands need to sort of really sort of thrive on that front? And I suppose the same if you sort of think about the West Midlands. If you go to somebody, you've got £10 million, invest it in what?
And I think this is the point that I don't think we've ever been really truly commission ready, if that makes sense, in the kind of the cultural sector. So when money comes in from government, for example, and I think, to be honest, I think this is just from across the patch. It's not just culture, but there's £10 million that comes in from DFE or the Home Office, wherever it is. There's this moment of pure panic where everyone goes, oh, right, okay, what did we say? We're going to do something. When have we got to spend it? You've got 8 months. Right, okay.
Yeah.
And everyone just has this pure panic of going, I don't know what we said that we were going to do within this, even though we've got these plans and we've got these strategies and we've got all of this, that we've been working on for all of this time. Actually, when push comes to shove and that £10 million pops into your bank, they go, we don't know what we're going to spend this on. So what then happens is it becomes a flurry of ideas. Everything's kind of thrown up in the air. Then they're making very kind of choice decisions about who should and shouldn't be able to get this money from where. Where does that needs analysis come from? Where's the evidence behind that? Just because someone has said you are or not eligible, why is that? And we can't challenge that because there isn't a way to be able to really understand where that thinking is behind that. So then we don't have this commissioning ready model so that we know when this money is coming in, we've got a very clear plan of where that money needs to go to in order to improve X, Y, and Z in terms of our priorities. But I'm not a leader.
I want to know what happened to that Arts Council piece, which is probably about 7 or 8 years old, where they were looking at all of the cultural piece and Green Book initiatives around what's it giving back to anybody who even doesn't visit a museum or a library. What does it add to house prices, to the wealth of the area, to the culture of the area? Whatever happened to that piece of work in terms of mapping the whole of the UK? Because I was involved with that piece of work for Nottingham, and surely that could be a great initiative in terms of going, well, do you know what? We did this whole mapping exercise of the UK and every single bit of heritage arts and culture, and actually these are the priorities. These are the at-risk organisations, a bit like Historic England. And let's actually tick them off one by one.
Do you know what? I mean, to listen to both of you, it just shows how chaotic decision making at a national and sometimes at a local level has been. And if I'm a taxpayer thinking, I really like the arts and culture and heritage, I want my taxes to support that, and thinking, not all the time, but thinking about the absolutely chaotic way it's organised. We don't learn the lesson from the past, as Sarah's just said. We don't think experientially about it. The decision-making is short-term. It's short-term fixes on it. And, I mean, the other thing is that sometimes, like national government, and I've said this to national government, is you rely on institutions that are 100+ years old, that are risk averse, to fund initiatives where you need to have a bit of imagination and see the botanical gardens. So it's not just a great space that people go to, but as a real anchor in terms of the city, in terms of renewal. It's same for Derby as well in terms of your organisation, Alex. And it just makes me really, really cross, actually, and frustrated. So goodness knows what it does to people like you, the two of you are in that sector, or do you just get used to it?
Well, I don't think you ever get used to it, actually. And I think you become, well, I've just become, I suppose, I suppose it's accepting, I suppose, is one word of it. But internally, you're absolutely frustrated by it because it's just a repeated, process. And I've got many colleagues that run nationals, and I understand the importance of nationals. And I understand the point of, the civic museum sector and all of these different subject specialist groups that are around the UK. But as you say, they are run on very old models. They are generally, if we're talking about the nationals, there's some government representation there that's really quite powerful in terms of being able to advocate for monies coming in. I mean, how can you say through the Arts Council and DCMS that there's this billions of pounds over here for the nationals? And I don't take away from the nationals; they do amazing work, and my colleagues do amazing work in that in that particular area. But then there's nothing for anything over here. I mean, it's just not equitable, is it? No. And that's the challenge around all of it, because there is a tendency to see, certainly through headlines, that actually big pots of money are going to the same people, just very, more regularly than others. And what about those grassroots that are still preserving stories from different communities, that have been doing it quietly over here, and actually no recognition, but they're doing amazing work with their communities, supporting learning, health and well-being, all of that stuff. And all of that is a benefit to society. So everything that we're all doing is a massive benefit to society, saving the NHS undoubtedly. Gardens, £356 per person we save by people going to gardens a year that are not going to the NHS. Why is there no recognition about that?
That's your social return on investment as well. And I don't think, and I think, I think there's a couple of things. So before I started as director for Culture Derby, I was the programme lead for Family Hubs. So I was working with Department for Education and Department for Health and Social Care. So I then, and working with NHS, ICB, etc., really understanding health and the inequalities, but also the DFE were very, very aware of the family hubs needing to be evidence-based. It has to be evidence-based so that, you have this what works. And as long as that programme is on the what works and it's a tick in the box, you're allowed to commission that evidence-based programme to be able to deliver for families. Anyway, there was a strand within this, and it was one of my favourite strands, which is when I read it, it was home learning environment, speech, language and communication for children. Brilliant. I thought, this is it. This is my little bit that I'm really going to be able to bring culture into this space. And I remember speaking to the DFE and going, okay, I really think that we need to have our cultural organisations delivering something for our under fives to support the speech and language and communication with those families that are currently not engaging with family hubs. Now, bearing in mind, they were children's centres before, and there was a lot of connotation between children's centres, social services. So a lot of those communities that we're talking about just had no trust. And so to be able to bring in culture bridged that gap for these most disengaged, communities to actually enter into a family hub. Anywho, the DFE turned around and said, absolutely, no way are you going to be able to deliver a programme that has culture in it, because there is no evidence to say that arts and culture have made any impact in the children's language communication or speech, so that you will not be able to do it. So once I'd, peeled myself off the ceiling and spoken to a lot of people and gone, give me every, research paper that you've possibly got, I then thought, how am I going to be able to do this? Because, again, we were talking about this earlier. Yeah. Anyone that says no or anyone that says you can't do it, I go, okay, here we go. And so, you've
thinking
got...
that you and Lauren are sisters or something.
You build that fire. You build this fire and this resilience in your belly, and you go, absolutely not. I'm going to keep fighting for this. And I remember bringing in a load of creatives and artists, and we trained them in an evidence-based programme. And then I said to them, right, now you deliver that however you want to deliver that, using culture, using music and dance, and, working with the speech and language therapists. The DFE then came to us a few months later and went, That's the most innovative delivery we have ever seen. DCMS are now really interested in this.
Well done you.
Fantastic.
Well done.
And I went, wow. But again, it goes back to this evidence in terms of why is it that we're not using the same, matrix or impact feed, those feedback reports that the NHS have got. We can easily do this and we can show you the impact that it's having, but yet we're not using the same evidence-based tools as other services. And actually, that's all we really need to be able to do to showcase why it's important for that investment to come into culture.
It's really
anyway, long story.
No, it's good. I want to bring him forward here because obviously you set up Forward Institute before Roots and Futures, but so you've obviously had that sort of brainchild of the word radical.
Radical.
I'm listening to you, and we'll get to what radical changes need to happen, but both of you actually are talking about almost that government layer, whether it's national or local. It's actually sort of really sort of slowing down the system, and it's not bringing that radical. And we've had new stuff come out around the office for impact economy today, and again, it's another government strategy coming out where it's like, actually we'll put a load of civil servants into the system to map things again, and very, very circular. So is it a strip out, or is it getting money down quicker? Or I always think it's private sector that needs to come in and catalyse.
It's like really interesting to listen to. Obviously, you and I have had long discussions about this, Lauren, but listen to Sarah and Alex speak about the amazing stuff that they're doing in spite of the system sometimes. And I think for me, having worked in like institutions, whether universities or running not-for-profits before, on it. I think if Forward had relied upon these institutions to get their act sorted out, I'd still be talking about Forward now. We wouldn't have left like the starting blocks of it. But because I said, you know what, this is a concept that developed in April with zero support. I'm just going to go to look at my Rolodex, go to my friends, including you, Sarah, and others, and thinking, what do you think of this? Has it got legs or not? And did it in a crowdfunded, experiential way, in a grassroots way. And now Forward, it's just me involved, as you know. Forward is going to go 150 organisations, from big global companies right the way for community organisations, working like internationally, locally, nationally, internationally with cities. And it actually sort of reflecting on our discussion now, today, I sort of reflected on what Caroline Cadbury said to me about George Cadbury, her great-grandfather in Birmingham, who she said when he decided to move the factory from the city centre to create Bourneville Garden suburb, and to move the factory there, and through his Quaker spirit and entrepreneurism, she said that if he had waited for people to give him permission, he wouldn't have done it. The fact that he was entrepreneur and created, you know what, I'm not going to wait for anyone. I'm going to do it because I believe in it, and I'm going to create this. It's that spirit of effective disruption, innovation, and galvanising people to your vision.
And there's a history of that even predating that. So if you're looking at the cooperative movement.
Absolutely.
And my husband's just finished a book about the cooperative movements, which I'm
Really?
Yes.
She's like, I'm not ready for press yet.
Just reading at the moment. But the history of what you've just spoken about, and that done on a micro and macro level across the UK, and how that created the wider cooperative movements to all band together as a challenge to capitalist society and the movements that are happening around that. It's well rehearsed in the UK, and it's well rehearsed around the world, and we need to be looking at models that are different now. And radical is seen as a word which can sometimes be frightening, but if you look at the true principles of radical and how it was used initially, it's just about alternative.
I wear radical as a badge of pride. I mean, I want to be radical. I want to be disruptive.
Yeah.
I want to be innovative. It's for collective benefit.
Yeah.
It's for civic renewal of cities and places. It's about connecting people to each other. And actually, all of the four of us have that spirit within us, because that's what drives us. Because you go against the system and you don't take no for an answer, because you believe in it in your heart and you're motivated by those same reasons. But it always makes me frustrated when Sarah spoke about the funding, and I think Alex did as well, going to the usual suspects. The usual suspects do it in the usual way, make the mistakes again, it doesn't matter. You know, in some instances, I think not only is that a terrible practice, but it's a corrupt practice as well, because your public money is going to the same pockets, and it's not going to other people who deserve it, who can be creative and innovative. And I think one of the reasons why politics is in the position that we are in now is that people from the left and the right are rebelling against the system that we have.
Yeah.
And that goes back to why it's so important for the work that you're doing in Derby, the amazing work that you're doing in Birmingham, to have a space and to recognise and validate that. Because these two individuals, these two leaders, galvanise and bring people together. For common benefit.
There's a question here before we sort of start summarising and come to both of you for that. Actually, what's your sort of big three things you do for Radical? There's a bit here where I'm going, how on earth does youth have a chance? Do you know? And I've had to take an incredible risk just to set up Roots and Futures, and you've talked about the youth voice, and you've talked about 5-year-olds, but actually that 20 to 30 and 30 to 40, you need a lot of resource and energy behind you.
I think what we've been trying to do in Derby is, you know, we're recognising that, and I don't think that there's ever been those opportunities. Again, I describe myself as like a cultural connector. That's what I am. So I connect people, places, things, anything that I possibly can, to bring people into conversations and to marry those dots and find those connectivities when other people can't seem to see that. And I find it somehow, maybe it's just my brain, it's just sees things in a different way. But the kind of 20 to 30-year-olds, as you were talking about, these are so important for our next generation of creatives. And we're doing, you know, and all of our cultural organisations do so much in kind of education and support in terms of learning and all of that. But actually that cut-off point of around 17 to 20, 30 is really important to be able to keep harnessing the fact that these are creatives, they are emerging artists, they are, you know, the innovators of tomorrow. These are the pioneers and the people that we need to really harness and nurture and look after, but give them the opportunities. So part of the work that we're trying to do in Derby is about retaining this talent. Well, the only way that you can retain talent is to be able to provide opportunities and to be able to provide the space for those opportunities and stop being so risk averse that actually allows them to grow, spread their wings, put down those roots and actually blossom, and you know, give them the food and the water and everything that they need in order to survive, but also to thrive. Yeah. So a lot of the work that I've been doing is about connecting and networks, because they haven't had opportunities like this in Derby for 10, 15 years of just creatives coming together, of young creatives coming together, of understanding opportunities, how to be entrepreneurial, giving them the space and the opportunity for support and programmes. And for someone, and I think you said it earlier, how it's the belief. And it's not just us believing in what we're doing. Mainly my belief is within other people. So I believe in them and I give them all my energy and all my passion, and I will look at them and I go, I believe in you. And then do you know what? And that's what our young people need, is someone believes in me. They believe that I can do this. They're giving me the opportunity and I'm not going to fall. I'm going to be able to fly. Yeah, you might have a few wobbles on the way, but ultimately our city is holding you, and we're like a big family. That for me is the most important.
I mean, I think that's absolutely right, but I also think that there is an element of balancing up a national agenda which is focusing too much on STEM and has done. And STEM's brilliant. I mean, we couldn't do anything at the Gardens with loads of STEM, but actually, you've got to be able to imagine it if you're going to be able to create it. So you can be as clever as you like in terms of maths, but if you can't imagine how you're going to utilise that in a real world impact for real world progression, then you might as well be sat in a box.
Yeah.
So I just would like the government, and there is a little bit of movement, to be fair, in terms of levelling up, maybe doing a little bit around music and creative bits and pieces. But there needs to be an understanding that widening pathways, extending and growing pathways into creative industries and heritage arts and culture is as valid as creating a zillion scientists. Because unless we've got some sort of collaborative approach and we're all working together with different lived experience, different talents and different outputs, then we're just going to be creating carbon copies and making the same mistakes all over again.
That point you just made is like super interesting, because the conversations that I've had with people who run big businesses in the private sector in Birmingham is that, sure, the technical skills that people have is really important to fire the economy, but they speak as passionately, in fact more passionately, about creating a city that has amazing environmental spaces, has an amazing arts offer, has a nighttime economy, is safe.
It's live, work, play.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Live, work, play. And that gets lost in the sort of metric-driven world that we have, where you've forced down a very narrow pathway. And I think, like both of you are saying, is that the pathway has got to be wide. It's got to enable people to participate.
And it's also got to be person-centred.
Yes.
And it's got to be, and I would say this, wouldn't I, nature-centred as well. Because unless we're going to be thinking about environmentalism and how people and all of the things that we do on the earth sits within that, we're going to be, frankly, stuffed.
And also the fact is, going back to Sarah's point, that creativity, what employers want is someone to be able to sell, is someone to be able to speak on a podcast and be able to, sell the next product. They need to be able to present. They need to be able to work with different colleagues. They need to be able to negotiate. They need to be able to communicate and connect and develop those sustainable partnerships. You are only able to do that through the confidence that culture, arts are able to give you.
Music graduates are the most employable graduates because they have a range, out of all of the different art forms, they have a range of skills which can lean into all of those touch points.
There you go.
And one of the biggest exports that we should be proud of as a country, a relatively small country, is our exports around arts and culture and music and creativity, which is something that we should never take for granted, because we have been a world leader on that. And I think the other thing that, Alex, that you said, and you sort of echo Sarah's point as well, is our universities are in danger. The problem with universities at the moment is that they are replicating each other in their offer to students. And they're saying that you need to go down this path because this is where the jobs are. I understand that. But for goodness sake, have space for different types of people to go to university or go to FE colleges that want to do something different in their lives. Because that's a true sense of diversity, is that there's different pathways that to create a city and a successful city. I would say that if you look at like Birmingham as a city that is very industrial, it has a very proud industrial heritage and the future of that city in uncertain times. Look to Detroit, Look to Detroit in the United States. It's a city that no one wanted to live in. That 83% black city, a historic African American community. Everyone was leaving, and the people who started renewing and regenerating that city were the very people that you two spoke about, young creatives who not only started creating new businesses, but then reclaimed the land that had been left derelict and created these spaces for people. And now Detroit is coming back on the back of arts, culture, the environment that the two of you spoke about. And that's the lesson for people who have short memories, who are in positions of power and influence, to understand. That's the value of arts and culture, that cities need that space. They need the environment. Just imagine New York City without Central Park or the High Line. They need the environment, they need arts, they need culture. These are all the things that leaders who invest in cities want for their employees on it. And I think that, for me, that's the sort of heart of like civic renewal.
Yeah, no. Right, I'm going to come and ask the question and start wrapping things up. Alex, 3 things, if you can, of radical change that should happen in the East Midlands.
3 things of radical change. I believe that there needs to be the opportunity for more young people. I think, just kind of going back to what we were just talking around, is giving young people really the power and autonomy. I'm not talking about the whole of the city, but just a part or a service or a sector, somewhere in which we can actually trust the next generation of our citizens to be able to fundamentally change something within their city, that they have the power to do. I feel that is a radical change that a lot of people are very scared about, very sceptical about. But actually, if we were to able to give them the trust and the development, we could be creating the most incredible leaders of tomorrow, personally. Second one, I think, for the East Midlands to work better with the West Midlands. I went to a creative leaders breakfast for a couple of weeks ago, and there was loads of people from the West Midlands, and there was only 3 of us from the East Midlands.
Oh, we're so underrepresented as a region.
So I
it's
was
like a desert.
look, we're all the Midlands. Why can't we just work together? So I know it's not completely radical, but I feel that we are the Midlands. We are here. We're not just up north, because people think that is past London. And actually, can we just regain our own identity and share that best practice and be really good neighbours? And then I think the third radical change that I would really, truly like to see is for our political parties and for our local authorities and our government to just ease the red tape.
That would be radical.
It's the most radical that I could think of, because if that happened, we would actually be able to make change happen. And radical as it is, it would be the most incredible, transformative opportunity that our cities have ever had the opportunity to be a part of. That's it.
Very good. Sarah?
So I think the first one is moving to different socioeconomic models just across the UK. I mean, how many times do we need to tell ourselves that the existing models are not working for people and for the planet? And surely, should we just test some different ones and actually be bold and innovative and just do it? So, sort of universal income. What's happened to all of that stuff? And that's gone really quiet, hasn't it, all of a sudden? So, look back into the past, see what's happened, see what works. Let's try and just vary it a bit and see what happens. To one of our first points, significant and meaningful investment and long-term investment that is visionary for heritage arts and culture across the whole of the UK on in an understandable approach, one that is researched and informed and has buy-in from local communities, and we know what we're saving, we know what we're investing in, and we know what the outputs are from that investment. So that, and then for it just to be, and of course, again, I would say this, wouldn't I? Thinking about the meetings I still go to where nobody talks about environmentalism or nature or climate change. I mean, really?
Yeah.
I mean, really? So thinking about nature, people, and how we are forward planning our cities, our housing, our education systems, our entertainment systems, our network in terms of transport. How are we doing that with it at its centre? If we don't do something about that, then I know everybody says it, but time is really, really limited now. Yeah. And if we lose plants, that's it for us as a species. So we have got to do something really radical in terms of thinking about how we're going to transform our living spaces and put nature at the heart of this.
I think that's a wonderful way to end things, actually. We need to start putting nature first, and actually at our tables, our decision making and as part of our governance